So thanks again, and thanks for this invitation, very kind invitation. And I'd like to say thanks to the invitation for two reasons. And the first is that it's forced me really in the 50th anniversary of the convention to write a new presentation about what I really think about World Heritage, having lived with World Heritage now I think for 25 years, and 10 years of that on the ground in a World Heritage site. And 15 years in IUCN. So this is a new presentation, which is a dangerous thing to do because I hope I'll stay to 32 minutes, but let's see. It hasn't been timed. But I also thank you because it gives me the chance to go back to the Dorset and East Devon coast, my hometown and the heart of a real World Heritage site. And to bring you a message from my mentor, Professor Dennis Brunsden, who was a visiting professor here in Heidelberg. This is what I looked like at the time in 2001, 2002, when we made it on the World Heritage list. So if nothing else, this is a cautionary tale for what World Heritage, 20 years of World Heritage does to you. But Dennis Brunsden, who I spoke to in preparing this presentation, wanted to really relay his recognition of the role that the University of Heidelberg and Dietrich Barsch, who was, I think, the chair of geography here, and Hannah Bremer, who passed through here on the way to Bonn, had as mentors to him, but also who helped the nomination of the Dorset and East Devon coast to come together. And I don't think I would be here if it wasn't for Dennis Brunsden, and I guess Dennis Brunsden might not have come up with the World Heritage site that I was responsible for without Heidelberg. So thanks to you, and thanks for the chance to say that. Let me turn very briefly. I'll assume, as this is the 5th lecture, that you know a lot about World Heritage, so I'll try to not delve into the details, but just to tell you in one slide that IUCN is the world's largest and oldest conservation network, and that we're quite a large organization with more than 1,400, I should have put my glasses on, more than 1,300 national government and NGO and Indigenous Peoples Organization members, 16,000 scientists that volunteer for us, and 850 staff worldwide. But I'm speaking to you today not really speaking on behalf of IUCN, but with my own views. And also then just to recall that IUCN as an advisory body to the World Heritage Convention, like ICOMOS and like ICROM, has a distinct statutory role in the convention, which for us involves nominating, evaluating sites that are nominated, monitoring the sites that are listed, and providing the policy and the strategy and the capacity building advice to the convention. And for amongst the World Heritage sites, we focus primarily on natural heritage. The 4 criteria here that you see on the screen that focus on important scenic areas, important ecosystems, important geological sites, and important sites for species conservation. And we do have a role to provide advice indirectly to the Convention on Cultural Landscapes, which ICOMOS assesses, but where we provide advice to ICOMOS. And in practice, that means in World Heritage, we look sometimes like this with our expert panel that provides the scientific advice to the convention, and Barbara Engels is a current member of that panel. But we also have, in normal non-COVID times, 25 missions each year out to evaluate or to monitor World Heritage sites. And then here, photographs from the World Heritage Committee as it was hosted in Bonn. IUCN has a very high-profile role providing advice and negotiating and trying to communicate the need for conservation and good results from the World Heritage Convention. IUCN has had this role since the very beginning of the convention in 1972, but even before that, in 1966, which, full disclosure, was the year that I was born, IUCN's General Assembly heard one of the first proposals coming from the United States for there to be a World Heritage Convention. And I won't read the words on the slide, but you can see that we've followed this convention for a long time. And here in its 50th anniversary year, here's the logo from UNESCO celebrating the 50th anniversary, which I'll have something to say about later. This is a time to rethink and consider our engagement in World Heritage. And a lot of what I'm presenting to you are the points that we're now focusing on with a new independent review of our engagement in World Heritage that is currently underway. So let me meditate a little bit on what we think is important in terms of our future relationship to the World Heritage Convention. I think the way this presentation has come together, I have in the end 2 big messages and 7 supporting messages to share with you as a perspective on World Heritage and nature conservation here in the 21st century in 2022, 50 years after this convention came into being. And the first of these messages is that we have to think that if World Heritage is to be credible, it has to contribute to broader goals. I won't, in the short time I have, try to give you the crash course on nature conservation priorities globally, but just to say we focus firstly on the Sustainable Development Goals. We're secondly in the middle, still in a process that should have finished in 2020, in looking forward to the new Global Biodiversity Framework, which is the new agreement under the aegis of the Convention on Biological Diversity for the targets for nature conservation for the whole planet. And then in IUCN, we've just relaunched our new decade-long program, Nature 2030. So World Heritage needs to find its place in these bigger strategies if it's going to have a place. It cannot be an end only to itself. It needs to be supporting wider ends. So please take that as one key message about the context for my presentation. But then I'm going to focus quickly now on 7 areas of work which are the focus for the strategic review that I mentioned, and see how World Heritage is faring and what I think is a reasonably good digest of 7 key things a good convention needs to deliver in 2022. The first of these is the most obvious, which is what is the World Heritage Convention doing in achieving the conservation of natural sites? And in this instance, well, we have some quite impressive statistics. I think firstly, we have natural sites, only 250, but they cover a very big part of the planet. They cover nearly 7.5% of all of the areas that have been designated as protected and conserved areas. And in more than 40 countries, World Heritage sites are more than 10% of everything that's been protected to conserve nature. The next 20 seconds, I think, is what you get to just try to pay regard to the quality and the diversity of the natural World Heritage sites that are on the World Heritage list. I won't try to mention any of them by name, but just very quickly to show you a tiny subset of the major sites of the world, which is, I guess, one of the privileges of World Heritage, that we can focus on these incredible places. But I'd like mainly here to just try to dig behind the showbiz of World Heritage and present the results of IUCN's World Heritage Outlook, which is our global assessment of the potential for World Heritage sites to conserve their values. We've now had 10 years of this new measurement of the conservation results coming from World Heritage sites. And just to give you the headlines from that, please take the report and read it. The first is that in 10 years, the overall outlook, the prospects for natural World Heritage sites is not improving. 1/3 of sites have significant concern or are have a critical outlook in terms of their potential to maintain their nature conservation values. The values themselves that are recognized on the World Heritage list perhaps still are relatively well conserved right now, but we see for biodiversity sites up to 40% of sites with values that we start to have real concerns about, and 11% where those values really are not secure. If we look at threats, we can see that the threats over the time we've been evaluating the prospects for World Heritage sites have grown significantly. And the headlines to share with you on that is that we've seen for the first time in the last Outlook assessment in 2020, climate change has become the greatest single identified threat in World Heritage sites to their values. This is followed by the impacts of invasive alien species and the impacts of tourism and infrastructure-related projects, but many and growing threats to World Heritage sites. And then if we look at the third thing we assess in the World Heritage Outlook, the overall effectiveness of World Heritage sites in their management in their on-ground conservation status is a source of quite significant concern. Only half of World Heritage sites have got largely effective or very effective management in place. So half the sites don't have secure, good quality management in place. So if I turn to my second message, that it is that we need to see that delivering much stronger conservation outcomes for natural World Heritage sites is a real litmus test of whether the Convention is a credible conservation instrument. And I think at the moment we can see some quite concerning signs about the prospects, even though there are still quite significant positives. You know, we have this very large range of significant sites. They include some very large and still very intact ecosystems, which have a particularly important role to play in the future of conservation. We have an unmatched knowledge, I think, in any family of conserved sites on the planet about their quality, their status and their evolution. And they can bring us some new and important different dynamics to nature conservation, the very high visibility they have, some different drivers, national pride, you know, the wish to see good results from conservation is much more prominent with World Heritage than with other designations. And we see also that this recognition of the need to improve can give us a real relevance to some of the bigger programs I was talking about earlier. But I think we need to be really concerned that performance is flatlining in terms of the quality of World Heritage sites. And we still don't really see these larger global conservation programs picking up World Heritage as a priority. And that might be because of the small number of sites. Even if they're large in area, it's a small and somewhat select group of sites. So how do you make a strategy out of World Heritage is a big question. And then I think some of the new challenges, particularly climate change, really poses some significant issues where you can't capture the conservation actions that are needed at local level. What can we do about climate change impacts on a World Heritage site when it's really everybody that needs to act on climate change? Let me turn to my second challenge, which is the place more broadly of sustainable development in the World Heritage Convention. And here the Convention really was a late adopter. It was only in 2015 that it framed a sustainable development policy that brought it up to date with international norms for indigenous peoples, for engagement with the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's a good policy. But I think one of the challenges we have is that we still really don't have the measures in place to implement it. It's also a challenge because if you look back to my list of threats from the World Heritage Outlook, you know, many of the threats that we can see and that are growing in different ways are manifestations of unsustainable development, of uses that are incompatible with or are being framed in a way and done in a way which is damaging conservation prospects. Probably if you add them all up, you could say that unsustainable development is still the largest threat to World Heritage. And so what's the key message here? Message 3 is that World Heritage conservation has got to play a positive role in development and in achieving more than the conservation of World Heritage values if it's going to both tackle threats but really be relevant. And so here again we can see positives, but we can see some really quite significant challenges. You know, we have a good policy in place. You know, we can see World Heritage brings potential for development. We've seen some areas, notably commitments of sustainability in the extractive industry sector, oil and gas and mining, where World Heritage has been able to secure commitments that industry's not made in other places. We have a very leading position in the use of environmental impact assessment. And a really important part of the success or the opportunity of World Heritage is it looks to the need for results to be conservation beyond the boundaries of an individual protected area. It can often be an issue that site managers of a World Heritage site can't influence anything outside of the boundaries of their protected area. But World Heritage expects the commitment to be national and international. However, I think we've still got a lot of challenges here, and the inability to show the relationship of World Heritage with achieving broader sustainable development is a really growing tension in where a number of states parties and a number of regions, and notably Africa, don't see World Heritage speaking to their priorities. So we still see sites that are significantly treated as islands, even if the accountability should be larger. Our World Heritage approaches are generally very reactive They respond when a problem is identified, and they monitor and seek solutions at that point. But for the very big infrastructure projects, that doesn't work. You know, you have to be much more proactive in engaging support. And there are some really big issues that are not dealt with yet. World Heritage brings big expectations about tourism, but has very weak and limited and fragile programs to say what conservation success should look like. And then we can still see where there's a trade-off or a challenge from a major development proposal in conserving World Heritage sites. It's by no means a given that conservation is going to be the priority. And in fact, we see a number of cases where these challenging developments are the priority at the national level, and the World Heritage Committee supports the state party to, if you like, go ahead with a development despite the fact there's damage to outstanding universal value. And some of this is our issue as advisory bodies, as IUCN, that we haven't been good enough in connecting World Heritage to development strategies and having the diversity and having the political thinking and policy connections at national level and at sub-regional level to really see how World Heritage is making a bigger contribution to good outcomes. So World Heritage has got to change its approach and show how it has a positive role in development. The third point, rights-based approaches. Well, we've seen some positive results for empowering Indigenous peoples, such as here in Kakadu in Australia, to protect their lands by accessing the World Heritage Convention. There's a celebrated case of Pimachuanake in Canada, which is another example of that. But we've also seen cases where local communities and Indigenous peoples object to sites being put forward for World Heritage status and haven't given their consent. And we see right up to the present day, those concerns, even though they are maybe one of the most defining, I think they'll be one of the most defining issues about the ethical basis and the performance of nature conservation in future years, the recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples. But we've seen the World Heritage Committee not making that the priority in some recent decisions. And here you can see, or you could see, if maybe you could just move my picture away from the quote, I could read it. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous People only last year saying it's regrettable that the World Heritage Committee's current working methods do not allow Indigenous peoples to participate in decision-making processes which clearly affect their rights and the future of their lands and resources. A damning statement if we look at what's credible for 21st century conservation. So what's the message here? World Heritage has to become rights positive, unquestionably rights positive, to be credible to 21st century nature conservation. And again, we have some positives. The policies are good. We're building rights concerns into the monitoring processes, and there is concern being raised by the rights community. But we, as I've just said, don't see committee decisions observing the norms that have been accepted internationally. That undermines the credibility of UNESCO and World Heritage. There's a real lack of space and lack of voice for Indigenous peoples in how the convention works, and we're still seeing really difficult and important issues coming to light on the ground, partially legacy issues that have come from long histories of how sites have been created, but still issues that are happening right now, rights infringements happening and being reported right now. So this is a significant concern. Let me turn to point 4, the regional imbalance of the World Heritage List, which is a huge undermining of internationalism and the engagement of many states parties. I did some maths, I probably got it slightly wrong, but I think it's more or less right, that the 18 countries that are best represented on the World Heritage List have about the same number of World Heritage sites as the 176 other countries that are less well represented. And if you look at Italy, Germany, France and Spain, 4 of the 5 most represented countries on the World Heritage List with China, it's 18% of the World Heritage List, and it takes 121 less represented countries to get as many World Heritage sites as just those 4 European countries. And here's a sort of map that shows the imbalance of the whole World Heritage List. I think that natural World Heritage sites are perhaps a good news story in this bad news about balance, because if we look at the last decade, Europe and North America had 20% of the sites, and there's 5 regions in UNESCO, so that seems to be about right, and the balance is certainly much better for nature conservation focused sites than cultural heritage sites. So perhaps there's an opportunity here. But if I bring this to a message, it is that World Heritage is going to need to become really accessible to all countries and to all communities if it's going to remain credible. And natural sites is a positive. It can be a way to a more balanced list. And we have really good gap studies and 45 years of good science about what could be put forward to become a World Heritage area. But there are negatives. The processes of nominating World Heritage sites are very expensive, they're very complicated, and the imbalances are very deeply ingrained. If you look at every metric apart from sites being listed, all of it tilts in favour of the same imbalance in representation. I think as IUCN we're very concerned that the response in UNESCO to this challenge has been to reduce the scope for states to make nominations, but that actually disadvantages nature conservation because fewer natural sites get nominated, because primarily it's mainly culture ministries and culture parts of governments that relate to the culture sector of UNESCO that manages World Heritage. And we've seen some significant successes in communities being empowered to make nominations, but that space is very unclear in terms of whether it's really being welcomed and advocated when it's really still the governments that control the process. So accessibility and balance is another key issue. Let me turn to the fifth of my 7 issues, just so that you can guess how much longer I'm going to talk for. I've still got 10 minutes, I think. This is governance, and I think this was mentioned by Professor Schmitt, as you've done work on this, I know. This diagram, with thanks to a former UNESCO colleague, Mark Patrick, is the concordance since 2005 of the advice the scientists and the experts give to the World Heritage Committee and whether that advice is agreed with. It's a pretty grim picture over time. You can see it's a continuing decline, but if you look at only agreeing half the time with the scientific advice, really we haven't had any real agreement more than half the time since 2010. So we don't see as an indicator that there's good governance, but this is not just an abstract issue, it's a real issue in terms of the performance of the convention. If we look at sites on the World Heritage List, let's go back to the World Heritage Outlook and compare the prospects on your left, the sites that we didn't recommend, if you like, and the sites that we did recommend. You can see that the conservation status is much better of the sites that are recommended. So conservation prospects are not served by sites that are not appropriate being put on the World Heritage List. And in this part of my presentation, well, what's the need? That World Heritage must demonstrate unimpeachable governance, but I don't see that many positives. There's a long-term recognition that there's a problem, but in a decade, we haven't seen a solution. There's a structural issue that only 21 countries make the decisions on behalf of everybody. The original idea of World Heritage, that it would be a technical committee, really isn't apparent anymore. It's primarily a politically led process. The guidelines that, as IUCN, we have to follow, we don't have an option but to follow the operational guidelines and not the framework often that the committee takes decisions within. They sort of get left to one side when it isn't convenient. So is this a rules-based system or not? If it isn't, sort of what is it? And then we have some real issues that there's no real corporate memory in a committee which only has 4-year mandates. People turn over and states go, and there's very little recollection of what was decided even at the last committee meeting, let alone 4 or 5 years ago. And this is very difficult because it also seems to be an increasingly polarized issue between the states themselves. There don't seem to be many incentives for reform, and there's lots of ways to talk about something else and divert from the issue. So how might we imagine unimpeachable governance might be tackled? I'm delighted to hear the discussants make those suggestions. The 6th of my issues is a bit of in some ways a boring but really important issue, which is the financial arrangements of the World Heritage Convention. What does the convention have to work on World Heritage sites? Well, in 1996, it had about $7,000 US dollars per site, and in 2021, we've got $2,500 per site in the budget. it's pretty thin. Huh? I guess if we added up what it cost us all to get here and be in this room, we might get close to the annual budget for a World Heritage Site in the World Heritage Convention. So here is a really big structural challenge to World Heritage that tends to, again, not get talked about. And World Heritage isn't going to function if it can't tackle its absolutely woeful finances. And again, I don't see much optimism in this instance, except we've spent more than a decade seeing there's a problem. But every time there's been an attempt to find a solution, the parties don't agree to it. We're talking about the funding of a statutory convention, but you can't find voluntary money to fund what is a statutory function. And there's very weak understanding that this is a big issue. This is one of the big, this is one of, I think, the big issues that everybody ignores. And really, there isn't the skill set available to the World Heritage Convention to deal with it. There aren't good fundraisers. There aren't great business skills being applied to what is this convention and what is the case for investing in it. And I think another big part of that is, if you talk to UNESCO about this issue, the only conversation is about the World Heritage Fund budget, not even about the whole of UNESCO's budget for World Heritage, and certainly not about the need that World Heritage has to access funding sources that are not UNESCO funding. So none of the big funds for the environment and for nature have any real recognition or priority for World Heritage. So how can we change that? And maybe I'm being too pessimistic, but I think we need to make a complete change in how we approach finances. And then my seventh issue is where I'll try to be a bit more optimistic, which is what is the role of the World Heritage Convention in innovation and in leadership. And particularly, I think, because of the invitation, where this invitation comes from, I'll take a little bit longer to talk about one of three, what I think could be three areas, at least, where innovation and leadership could come from. The first is the linking of nature and culture in biodiversity conservation. I'll say something briefly about World Heritage Site Managers and something also briefly about the connection to internationally designated sites. But let me, in terms of nature and culture, again, take you back to my previous life as a World Heritage Site Manager, where this UNESCO, IUCN, ICOMOS thing was just this sort of blob that sort of hung above the site. We didn't really understand it, but it was probably all UNESCO. And what did it mean on the ground? And my site, geomorphological and geological site, was recognized just for the one World Heritage criteria, superlative geology. But we never really thought it was only about geology. We have a place that's full of nice biodiversity, and internationally and European biodiversity sites, but it's the place where we live and work, and it's the place where our ancestors come from, and it's the place where great authors wrote their work about. It's a place to celebrate for lots of reasons apart from the geology. So outstanding universal value doesn't really necessarily jive with what makes local sites important. We miss the connection in World Heritage to intangible heritage, whether that's local food, whether it's the spiritual values that places have associated with them. We don't make the connections to modern culture, modern arts, and the means that has to connect people and practice. And for a long time, this is how we've given advice to the World Heritage Committee. IUCN drives its juggernaut, and ICOMOS drives its juggernaut, and we try to line the windows up and shout at each other, but we don't have a coordinated process. So the good news is this has been changing in now over a decade. We have the Connecting Practice Initiative between IUCN and ICOMOS, and with support of the Christensen Fund, rethinking the approaches we take to how we give advice in a way which connects nature and culture and responds to the demands of indigenous peoples in particular, that by doing this in the Western way and putting nature in a box and culture in a box, it doesn't resonate with how they live their lives, how they work with their places. We have also now 6 years of the World Heritage Leadership Programme, our major capacity building effort supported by Norway, partnership between IUCN and ICROM with UNESCO, and ICOMOS, which is focused on avoiding any disconnect between nature and culture from the very start, sharing one program, sharing our different ideas, and trying to test new and different leading standards about the connections that we can see on the ground are how real places work. not in this sort of abstracted way of working. If I just focus on hardcore biodiversity conservation and the world's key biodiversity areas, the most important areas for biodiversity to persist on the planet, there are as many cultural World Heritage sites that overlap with key biodiversity areas, more or less, as natural sites. So we're actually missing a huge opportunity for biodiversity conservation. And as I've already, I think, covered the point earlier, the future of biodiversity conservation right now needs a change in approach which embraces, empowers and respects the efforts of Indigenous peoples. So rethinking this approach to give Indigenous-led conservation a place in the World Heritage Convention is one of the most powerful things we could do. But that will only come again if we bring nature and culture together. Linked to that, a second reason to be optimistic, I think, is this is bringing site managers and the locally responsible actors to World Heritage into the convention with voice and with a place to act. And slowly but surely, we're seeing things like an annual site managers forum, the obvious things that the people that deliver World Heritage on the ground are actually present, are actually part of the discussion, is now starting to happen. And this is what a group of site managers said they wanted to see change in World Heritage, which is it goes from being a sort of top-down, UNESCO tells us what to do, only in English and French, World Heritage Convention, to an approach which puts the sites and their successful conservation practice as the top of an inverted pyramid, and then our intergovernmental and our international expert processes support the results on the ground. You know, we give more agency to practitioners, we give more respect to the barrier that linguistic diversity provides to World Heritage having impact on the ground, and we really respect that if we're going to work at ground level, we need to start with what works at ground level. And then my last point, I'm hoping Barbara might say something about this, is we're missing a really big opportunity to link World Heritage to the other family, the wider family of international designations, biosphere reserves, UNESCO Global Geoparks, Ramsar sites, the international protected wetlands, all of which actually have a focus on the interaction of nature and culture, but all at the moment working in their different boxes. So there's a real opportunity to link things together. And so here I think I won't, because I'm slightly on time, say everything which I think I've covered about the positives, but where we do have some negatives here. If the wider convention isn't something we have confidence in, then saying that it's an innovative convention is going to be hard to do. We have a system that's very overstretched by the regular demands of World Heritage, and we need some new models to finance and to make this vision happen. So that's my 8th message, and here's the last one. The 9th message, if you take home one thing from this presentation, a future for World Heritage is not guaranteed, I think, unless there is a major renewal now in the 50th anniversary throughout the convention. If I try to apply a little bit of the World Heritage Outlook thinking, green is good, orange is not so good, and red is pretty bad, the circles are the current status, and I think the arrows would probably, you know, I'm a biased observer, probably you could argue about the optimism, are showing us that we're not really making much progress in many areas of an improved World Heritage Convention right now. It's a very challenging world. And so I think my last slide is this one, which is to suggest that the 50th anniversary we can contemplate two futures for the World Heritage Convention, and we can wonder whether it'll make it to its 100th anniversary or even its 60th. The positive future is one where it'll deliver positive results for biodiversity, it'll deliver on rights, it'll deliver on sustainable development, it'll deliver for all regions and cultures, and it will be innovative. And that's the road to relevance, to investment, to reputation and to leadership. And the converse, if it cannot do those things, if it undermines rights, if sites are not conserved, if it's still only accessible to the well-resourced few, and if it's got no new ideas and just plain catching up, well, that's the road to irrelevance and bankruptcy and eventual abandonment. So the jury's out, but I think we're at a very challenging moment where we need to rethink our approaches. And with that, vielen Dank für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit. Thank you very much.